Hello, athletes. I didn't realize I was live. All right, let me switch over my screen here. All right, today I'm going to talk about those horrible GI issues that we tend to get on race day and why do they happen? And the funny thing about this talk is that we can't blame everything on nutrition. And the reason why I wanted to do this talk is after an Ironman, after a half Ironman, I'll get athletes, either nutrition or coach athletes, emailing me, my nutrition was off, or I don't understand. I don't get these problems in training. I only have them on race day. I don't understand why I have these GI issues. And and then it's so easy to just blame everything on nutrition. And yes, nutrition is very important. But throughout this chat, I want to dive into this topic a little bit more because my background prior to sports nutrition was exercise physiology. So most of my entire educational journey in undergrad, which I studied exercise science, and then my master's in exercise physiology, was all about the human body during exercise. And it wasn't until I became an RD that I started to find that passion for sports nutrition and combine it with my master's of science. But really, all of my education comes from a strong foundation of understanding the human body in motion. And that is how I write workouts. That's how I help athletes with daily nutrition and sports nutrition, is having that deep understanding of the human body. Throughout this talk, I want you to really keep that in mind, that it's not always about nutrition, but how your body is handling that intentional training stress or performance stress on race day. First off, sports nutrition is extremely important. So we don't want to devalue the importance of proper nutrition. Before the race, we want to have a good understanding of how to properly carbo load, and we want to get this dialed in. There shouldn't be any question about what you're going to eat in the 24, 48 hours before the race. It should be something that's well practiced, and the more you practice something, it becomes more familiar, and the more confident you can be for race day. We want to maximize our glycogen stores. This will help improve your performance, delay the onset of fatigue, extend the time to exhaustion, and also optimize hydration. Now, during the race, we all know the importance of carbohydrates. That helps prevent a drop in blood sugar. You can maintain high levels of carbohydrate oxidation, so keep the carbohydrates or glycogen going to the working muscles. You provide additional carbohydrates to help when those muscles begin to get depleted. This will help increase your endurance capacity, and also it helps with your brain. You may have heard of the swish and spit, that research even shows that even just putting some carbohydrate in your mouth and not even digesting it, but it can activate the sensors in your brain, which then can control your motor neurons to help you move forward. And that's really important. We'll get to that a little bit later. And then fluids. Fluids can help maintain hydration or prevent major dehydration. Dehydration is normal, and it actually hasn't been shown to cause a performance decrement for elite athletes. Actually, those who perform the best tend to be more dehydrated than slower athletes, but there's always a limit for everybody. Thermoregulation, so how your body regulates body temperature, and then reducing oxidative stress. And then sodium. Sodium is our primary electrolyte lost in sweat. It helps the absorption and retentions of fluids, so helps with fluid balance. It protects your blood plasma, which helps reduce the stress of your cardio system, and then prevent hyponatremia, which is a drop in your sodium stores. All right. First thing I want to talk about is, let's get into some triathlon sports nutrition research. Let's dive into that research to see where we get our guidelines for sports nutrition. Where do they come from? Well, unfortunately, there isn't any research. There's no research in long distance triathlon, the half and the full distance. Sure, there are guidelines for sports nutrition. I mean, I'm sure you've read plenty of articles. I've read articles from the top researchers about guidelines for endurance sports nutrition. But when it comes to triathlon, it's impossible to do a quality research study outside the lab. And it's also really hard to do a quality research study inside a lab. How do you test athletes in a group of athletes and control all the variables for a 4 to 8 hour or a 8 to 17 hour event? It's just impossible. And here's why. We want to control or look at the type of athlete. Are we looking at an experienced and a fit athlete, like a top age grouper or professional, or perhaps an experienced but an unfit? Maybe this is somebody who has a lot of Ironman experience, but they haven't done the sport in a few years and they didn't do the preparation needed. Or perhaps an inexperienced but a fit athlete. I think of myself as that in my first Ironman, that I had no Ironman experience, but I had a tremendous amount of fitness coming from a swimming background. And then we also have our inexperienced and unfit. And this, I think there's a large group of people that probably don't do the right type of training or enough training, but still sign up or show up to the event on race day. And further, we want to look, are these athletes, are they coached? Are they following a training plan? What type of training? What type of coaching? How long have they been coached? And do they have any health issues like injuries or illnesses or underlying medical issues that we need to control for? And that's just one variable. Another one is race day conditions. I'm sure you can think of races where it's been cold, it's been hot, it's been cool, it's been warm, windy, humid, sunny, cloudy. I mean, we can think about a course like St. George 70.3 World Championships. You had a wetsuit legal or non-wetsuit swim. Then you had hail on the bike, and then you had rain on the run, yet it was still warm. And then we've had other races. I remember spectating Ironman Florida with Corel many years ago, and the day got colder as it went on. And then we have some races where the weather just stays consistent all day, like Kona, that it's just hot and it just gets hotter. So these changing conditions are really hard to control for. Then we have open water. Well, is it in an ocean, which would be salt water? Will we have lake, a river? Is it downstream? Is it wavy? Are there swells? Is it wetsuit? Is it non-wetsuit? What's the water temperature? All of this impacts the start of the race. And then the athletes that we're studying, what is their swim fitness? Do they come from a swimming background? Are they swim fit, but perhaps not fast? Are they not fast, relatively, let's say, on the slower end, the back half of swimmers? And have they not put in enough swim training? And then what's their experience? I always talk about you have to be swim fit for long distance triathlon. And even when I say that, taking it one step further, you have to have experience in the open water. And I can't tell you how many athletes go into races with no open water practice and just a handful of swims over the last few months, thinking that that's going to help them for the race. So experience is key, but how do you control that in a research study? And then cycling. What is the terrain like and what's the course layout? Is it hilly? Is it rolling? Is it technical? What's the road surface? Is it smooth? Is it chip seal? Are there a lot of athletes? There's 3,000 athletes where drafting can be help reduce the energy expenditure. Is there tailwind? Is there headwind? I think of a course like Lake Placid where you have a long stretch of downhill on the bike, and then you're climbing for the back half of the bike on 2 loops. And then it's kind of similar on the run, that you start off kind of net downhill and then you have to climb coming back. Well, that's going to impact the race, right? Or the study. And then you have a course like, I'll go back to St. George, where you've got a long downhill section before the run. And that's also going to impact the race. So it's very hard to control these things in a research study. And then taking it one step further, how do you account for terrain management? A lot of athletes lack the ability to know how to manage the terrain because of all the indoor riding, and also just never have learned those skills to ride outside. When do you get out of the saddle? How do you feel out the terrain? How do you change your gears? When do you change out your gears? Changing cadences, that all impacts cycling performance. Then the execution of the bike. Again, I talked about the course layout, but are you a good climber, and are you going to work more on the uphills? Are you good in steady state? How are you going to execute the bike? And then bike fit and aerodynamics. This is so important, and that would be really hard or more easy to control, the bike fit and the aerodynamics, but you still have these other factors playing into it. And then running, similar, the terrain and the course layout. How do you control for economy and how the swim and the bike affects the run? Again, is this somebody who has a lot of experience? Is it an experienced runner who comes from a running background? Or is it somebody who just started running? And then what's the weather like? And then also there's this other category, the mindset, the crowd support. I mean, crowd support is so important. And a course like Ironman Wisconsin, you have crowd support the entire time. It never gets lonely out there. But then you have other races where there could, like in Kona, where you've got 18 miles of the run or 16 miles of the run with just the volunteers. You're not getting that energy, and that can affect the mind as well. And then you think about dehydration. Again, was the race hot? Was it not hot? Thermoregulation, how well does this person control their body temperature? What was the level of glycogen depletion? What was their VO2 max, lactate threshold? We can control that, or test that. It's a little bit harder in the water, but still that's another variable to control. And then the race purpose, athletes these days, some athletes only race once a year or do an Ironman every few years. And then there's other athletes that race 3 times a year. And the Ironman is a very long day. It's almost more mental than physical because you have to think and troubleshoot all day. And it'd be really hard to really tap into the mind of, how deep is that person willing to go? Well, now that we know that there isn't any long distance triathlon research, well, now where do we get our sports nutrition research from? Well, we get it from single sports. Well, open water swimming, the research is just not well established. There is the use of support boats to provide the food and beverages, but the distances just aren't very comparable. 5K, 10K, 25K. We really can't use that information. And plus, in our race, we don't fuel on or take in anything on the run. It's just not possible, or on the swim, it's just not possible. But at the same time, we do want to use nutrition while swimming. So then in our practice is just to make sure we're hydrated. And also most of the gains in any sport happen in the back half of the workout. And that's usually where fatigue sets in. So having that sports drink can really help keep your technique together, keep you mentally focused, prevent hunger in that back half. So then we look at competitive pool swimming. Well, we don't really have guidelines for sports drinks for competitive pool swimming. I mean, the longest, even though practices are 2.5 hours, they're swimming 10,000 plus yards in a practice sometimes, but the longest event on race day is 1,500 meters. So we can't really apply that to long distance nutrition, sports nutrition guidelines. So then we think about cycling. Well, cycling is in a very controlled lab environment. And if I think about the previous slide, nothing is controlled in an Ironman or a half Ironman, and it can vary race to race. And then we have kind of the extreme opposite. We have the Tour de France, where there's been several studies on Tour de France riders, but can we really compare to a sport where they're racing for 3 weeks and you have different abilities? You've got sprinters, you've got domestiques, you've got climbers. A big portion of the race each day is at a very low intensity, especially if you're a sprinter. And so it's just really hard to compare. And plus, you've got the obvious. They're not running off the bike. So how can you say that it's okay to just eat solid food because that's what we can do in the Tour de France? We can't really apply that to Ironman because you have to run off the bike. Also, we have very different needs for hydration throughout the race and what our body can digest and absorb. So things are very different. We can't use that from cycling. And then we have running. Again, we have another controlled lab environment, and it's very easy to make recommendations with running. It's very easy to control factors for running, But when we look at then applying those guidelines to marathons, well, we've got a lot of consistency with weather, with courses. Races are canceled when it's above 70 degrees. And for any Ironman or triathlon, we'd be like, woohoo, that's great weather. So only 70 degrees. So you've got a lot of consistency, which makes it very easy to control the variables. But again, you're not factoring in swimming and biking before the run. And then we've got a whole lot of other physiological changes that happen by the time you get to a run. And then the obvious, every marathon runner is starting the race hydrated and fueled. An Ironman athlete is not starting the run hydrated and fueled. So then we think about the guidelines that triathletes, especially long distance triathletes, are given. Yeah, you can do fasted workouts. You need to become more metabolically efficient. Well, where's the research for that? How do we know that that's what's good for long distance triathletes? Oh, you only need fuel or hydration if it's more than 90 minutes. Okay, well, that might work for standalone runners, but when we're carrying around a lot of training stress, training 10 plus hours a week, 2 workouts a day, sometimes our long workouts are up to 6 hours. This has nothing to do with standalone running. So how can we apply the same guidelines for our workout when we might be doing a 30-minute run on very tired legs? We're dehydrated. You better believe that having that sports nutrition can help reduce muscle breakdown, can help with mental focus, can help with recovery, our immune system. So this doesn't apply. And then solid food. You'll hear guidelines of, well, it's okay to get your 60 grams of carbs on the bike. You can get it from solid food or real food. Doesn't really matter where it comes from. Well, I think about, well, what if you don't have good bike handling skills? You always have to drink. You always need fluids, but you don't always have to eat and chew. So you want to think about, well, what if I don't want that solid food anymore? Then what? So there's a lot of cases to be made of, maybe solid food as a primary fuel source on the bike in long distance triathlon, maybe it's not the best strategy. We've also heard electrolytes in a bottle, food in the pocket. Again, sports nutrition has to be well formulated to digest and absorbed, and it takes away the guessing. And your cravings, your taste buds, your energy needs change throughout the race. And having fueling from multiple different sources, pills, bars, real food, drinks, it can make it very messy to know if you're actually meeting your needs. And then gels. Gels come from running, and they're very convenient. They're very portable. But gels don't have water. They're not going to hydrate you. Gels do not contain enough sodium to replace what you're losing in sweat. And they're just a very concentrated energy source. And it's very easy to get taste bud fatigue from just consuming gels. So it's not a very practical source for long distance triathletes. And then salt pills. Again, we're coming into the issue of just taking products without actually knowing if it's being formulated in a way it can be digested and absorbed. So if you think about all of these guidelines, we're getting these guidelines from single sports, which we can't really apply to long distance triathlon. Sure, we can apply them, but when it comes to GI issues, we also have to think about, are these the best guidelines? Is there a better strategy to help reduce the risk for GI issues in long distance triathletes? Well, let's think about the physiological demands of long distance triathlon. And this is going to get into a little bit more science, a little bit more of my background in exercise physiology, but I think it's worth talking about it because we can make sports nutrition guidelines very simple. And I want to make them simple and very easy to execute. But it isn't until you understand why that it really is hard to buy in on the guidelines. So if we look at the common GI symptoms, I'm sure everybody can relate to one or two of these lower or upper GI issues. GI issues gastrointestinal issues are very common in endurance athletes, and there's a few reasons why. The gut, it is an organ. We call it an athletic organ because it's responsible for digesting, absorbing, and delivering nutrients and fluids. but it's also adaptable. You can train your gut just like you can train your muscles. Now, the reason why we are more prone to GI issues is because of the reduced blood flow to the intestines. And this is only going to be exacerbated when we cannot regulate our body temperature or when we're dehydrated. And then blood is diverted to the gut, to the working muscles. And then this lack of blood flow, it slows down gastric emptying. So then we can't get the nutrients and the fluids that we need, which is then going to bring on early fatigue. And then we can also further get gut discomfort and other uncomfortable GI issues. And for a lot of athletes, this can continue on. So it's not like once you eliminate or alleviate the GI issue, then you'll be good to go again. This can cause an inflammatory response, and it can be really hard to come back from GI issues in a race. Some of the common issues like bloating can be due to reduced gastric emptying, so your stomach's not emptying the contents from it. Diarrhea, there's osmotic shifts, so a lot of water coming in and out and affecting the concentration of what you're consuming. And then nausea, when that blood is diverted away from the gut to the muscles and skin, it can make you feel nauseous. Now, the reason why I highlighted certain words here is just because when you think of a long distance triathlon, of course we're going to be dehydrated. Of course we're going to get hot. And these things happen and they're going to slow down gastric emptying. So we have to keep these things in mind when it comes to our sports nutrition guidelines, because these are things that are happening to us that aren't happening in single sport events. And they're just magnified, especially by the time we get to a run, which is when most athletes experience those GI issues. Now, in my opinion, and I've worked with many athletes, hundreds of athletes on sports nutrition, and there are, in my mind, top reasons for GI issues. And this doesn't have to do with sports nutrition application or what products you're using or fitness or anything like that. This is what I usually see from athletes. They underfuel in training and overfuel on race day. And this is the athlete that comes to me and says, Marnie, I never experience issues in training. I can complete all my workouts. I never have issues. But then on race day, I just can't seem to put it together. Well, wouldn't you know that this athlete underfueling, although I'm not suggesting that you intentionally underfuel, but what ends up happening is that this athlete is taking in more than they've ever taken in before. They haven't trained their gut to digest a certain amount of carbohydrates or to oxidize a certain amount of carbohydrates. They haven't trained their gut to take in fluids while running. You know, how many times, I can't tell you how many times I've heard athletes, they just go out for a run. Yeah, I'll stop at a water fountain here or there. Or if it's an hour run, I don't bring anything with me. But then on race day, you better believe that this athlete is using every single aid station on the run. Well, you got to train yourself to use it on race day. So it's very easy for athletes to not even realize that they're taking in so much more on race day or even before race day than they are in training. So that's a very different thing and a big shock to your body. And then there's the more energy in, more energy out. And when you do an Ironman, I've done 19 standalone, I say standalone, 19 Ironmans, 2 extreme triathlons. In those 19 Ironmans, I can tell you that there are always low moments. There's always times when your body feels off. I think only one race I can remember, Ironman Wisconsin in 2018, I think it was, where it just felt like it wasn't until the last few miles that it really started to get hard. But I've had races where the first step on the marathon was just pure torture. I've had races where I was just in such a low energy deficit, kind of like just not even with it for several miles, and then finally able to bounce back. I've had races where I've had side stitches, just so many different things. And that's just normal. It's normal to have these highs and these really, really dark lows. The Ironman is not comfortable. And I can tell you from experience, I may not be the fastest runner, but I can run well on tired legs. So I've ran all of my marathons except for one. I had to do a lot more walking in Kona, but I've ran probably 80% of each marathon that I've run with walking at the aid stations, or as needed. But running the entire marathon, it's hard. It's painful. I mean, you really have to will yourself to go to a very deep place. So when we think about it, especially for the less experienced athletes or the athletes that just maybe don't race so often, that just because you put calories in your body, this doesn't mean that you're going to instantly feel better. And what ends up happening is anytime, so an athlete might have a really good nutrition plan, right? They're taking in whatever product is giving them 280 calories per hour, or whatever it is, but it's going well. And then they have a low moment. And so all of a sudden the athlete starts taking in more energy or takes in a gel or is worried about running out of energy because there's a hill coming up or the run's coming up. So they take in more calories. Well, just because you're taking those calories, it doesn't mean that you're going to get more energy. There's a limit, and we're going to get to that, as to how much the body can process and absorb. But also, it's not going to help your muscles feel any better. And then if you're already in a compromised state, you can't just come back from that because you're taking in calories. A good example I like to give to athletes is, think about being in the weight room and doing bench press or squats. How about weighted squats with a bar, right? Let's say that you've been doing a few sets of 10 reps and you've been squatting 100 pounds. Well, eventually you're going to get tired, but taking in a bunch of gels or taking in a bar, it's not going to help you bench press 100 pounds. It might not even help you bench press 50 pounds. You might have to move to taking all that weight off, or in other words, maybe walking or slowing down or stopping to recover. That's just part of the sport, is that you are going to get tired. And some athletes, based on their physiology or fitness level, you're going to get tired earlier than others. I can think back to the Ironman and times when I thought I was in the best shape of my life. And then fast forward 10 years later, I'm just like, wow, I can do things now that I never could do before. And that's just changing our physiology and improving fitness over time. And then the last thing is, athletes, they can finish an Ironman, right? I think we've all kind of, either you are that person or we've seen that person that's like, wow, they're out there for a long time and they're still finishing the Ironman. That's incredible. But the athlete doesn't have the strength and the efficiency to be able to continue running, or to be able to hold that same power, or to be able to put it all together. So you can have great endurance. You can do the long workouts. You can follow your training plan and feel prepared for the race. But you can also not be strong enough or efficient enough to be able to perform and to really show your fitness on race day. So now let's get into some of the science. So why do GI issues occur during long distance triathlon? Well, let's talk about the application, the timing, and the formulation of sports nutrition products. So let's think about the athlete who, as they're racing, they have a sports nutrition strategy. Well, first of all, is this a sports nutrition strategy that's going to help them delay fatigue? Is it going to be easy to keep up with this frequently throughout the entire bike? Is this a strategy that's been well practiced and trained the gut? Is this a strategy that's allowing this athlete to meet kind of energy out, energy in, fluids out, fluids in? It's not going to be perfect. You can't match it perfectly, but is it at a point where you're not trying to fuel the effort that you want to do, you're fueling the effort that you need to do to be able to put together a steady performance and a safe performance? So the human digestive tract, it's limited. It's limited to how much glucose can actually enter the bloodstream. So we can't just take in a 300 calorie bar. You can't digest that. You can't take in a bottle of Morton in an hour and then also take in several shot blocks. You can't take in three 25-gram gels uh, throughout an hour. It's just not possible because your body can only digest 1 gram of carbs per minute. The max is 60 grams per hour or 240 calories. So if you're taking your sports nutrition, that you're piling in more nutrition because you have a low moment or just because you think you need that energy, well, that's going to clog up your intestines. That the transporter that's responsible for absorption is SGLT-1, and it's completely saturated at 60 grams per hour. So we can think about it kind of like this is your stomach and or your intestines, and you're filling it up. It only holds 60 grams. So if you fill this up with a sports drink and then you put chews or a gel on top of that, it's going to be saturated. It's just going to overflow. And where's that going to go? It's just going to hang out in your stomach. And there's reasons why we don't want that there. Now, fructose uses a separate transporter, which is GLUT5, and it's completely independent of the transporter of SGLT. So when you have a product that has glucose or maltodextrin with fructose and they're mixed together, typically in a 2-to-1 ratio in a product like Infinite Fructose, Never Second, I think Guroctane, Morten. So when we have these two different transporters or carbohydrates, they don't compete for absorption. So then let's say that this is the intestines. Well, now let's say that this is now split in half. So some of that glucose and maltodextrin can go to one pathway and the other uses a different transporter. It can go to another pathway. So now you can get more than a gram per minute. So that's why now we can get 60 to 90 grams. Now, the 60 to 90 grams is only going to benefit you if you're expending that much energy per hour. So the way that I would, if you had to ask yourself, well, how do I know that's me? Well, a good question is, can you hold your steady state for 5+ hours? Your percentage of what you can hold on race day, is how much energy does that require? How much work does that require? And if it takes a lot of energy for you to push 150 watts or 140 watts and your heart rate is 150 beats per minute, that's a lot of work for your body to push so little watts. Let's say you're 200 pounds. You're working way too hard. Now, sure, to work that hard, you might need to take 60 to 90 grams, but because you're working so hard, that's not sustainable. And that's also going to impact you on the run. You're also going to, your body's going to heat up a lot quicker. You're going to not get enough oxygen to your working muscles. So really what we say is, instead of raising or bringing the nutrition up to your effort, why don't we lower the effort? Why don't we lower the effort a bit, take down the grams per hour, maybe 60 grams per hour. And now it's a lot easier. You'll feel like it's much more sustainable. You'll be able to put together a better run walk off the bike, and you'll have less risk for GI issues. So that's something to think about, is that in the Ironman, it's all about energy management. It's not about going hard. It's about going as fast as you can go with the least amount of energy possible. So rather than saying, okay, I need 60, 80, 90 grams of carbs per hour, you just have to ask yourself, are you really working that hard, and can you sustain that energy for that amount of time? Now, and the best way to know is just to practice. You have to practice and to know what percentage of your your FTP that is realistic, and not all watts are created equal. So you can't just say, well, I'm just going to hold 80% the whole time. But you can kind of have an idea based on training and previous races, what is actually sustainable for you? What's that percentage? And if you can't hold 70 or 80% of that FTP for 5 or 6 hours, then you probably don't need that 60 grams or 90 grams per hour. Now, under most extreme and heat and humidity conditions, the body cannot absorb more than 34 ounces of fluid per hour. Now, as a guideline, it takes about 15 minutes for your body to absorb 8 ounces of fluid. It also takes about 8 ounces of fluid for you to create the concentration that you can digest and absorb a gel. So think about that. If you start just randomly guzzling fluid at an aid station or because it's hot, and you have, let's say, a 26-ounce bottle of water, and now you are consuming half a bottle of, you have a 26-ounce bottle of sports nutrition, and then you get to 2 aid stations in that hour and you're guzzling it, and you end up drinking 40 ounces over that hour. Well, your body's not going to be able to digest and absorb that. That's going to certainly affect your GI system. And it also takes about 15 minutes for your body to actually absorb 8 ounces of fluid. So if you're just drinking, that's why we want to take small amounts frequently over the hour. So every 10 to 15 minutes, taking a few gulps is much better than taking a large amount of fluid and carbohydrates, every 30 or 45 minutes. Now, when you're dehydrated, it can take even longer for fluids to make their way from the stomach into the bloodstream. So think about that now. You're on the run, you're already dehydrated, you're dehydrated, and now you want to just take gels. Now you just plan to just drink sports drinks from the aid station, even though you haven't trained your gut to do so. No wonder there's GI issues for so many athletes on the run. It takes time for those fluids to make their way from the stomach into the bloodstream. And plus, you haven't even trained yourself to be able to take in those fluids. So it's just like a double whammy. And let's talk about the concentration of sports drinks. Well, isotonic is similar concentration to human blood. So the formulation of what you're consuming, the carbohydrates, the sodium, the fluids, it certainly matters. It can't just be a free-for-all that you just randomly take in sports nutrition saying, well, at least I'm getting 60 grams of carbs and I'm getting 600 milligrams of sodium and I'm getting 26 ounces of fluid. It needs to be the right formulation that it actually can be absorbed. If we have fiber, if we have fat, if we have too much salt, if we have highly concentrated carbohydrates, so taking in a large amount of carbohydrates at once without enough fluids, that is going to also increase GI issues because your intestines cannot absorb that. So if you're just chewing a bar and it has fiber or it has fat in it, it's not a bad thing, but it's going to slow down digestion. So if you are already low in energy, that bar's not going to do very much. And also, if you're low in energy and just having a low moment, you're better off just kind of waiting until it passes as opposed to just taking more nutrition in, because you need water to dilute whatever you're taking in. So if you are already working hard and you need to digest and absorb a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or some pretzels or a bunch of Cliff or goo blocks, well, now you're going to move water out of the blood into the gut, and that's further dehydrating you. So you have to really pay attention to the right product formulation. And that's why I tried to keep simple guidelines for my athletes, because I don't want to make it complicated. I want it to all be in one bottle per hour, and that's your only focus. Now, the stomach is the first barrier for delivering your sports nutrition and fluids to the blood. So it's the gatekeeper for the intestines. So imagine that I just have all this stuff here. Imagine that this is your stomach and this is your intestines here, right? So whatever you're taking in, yeah, sure, it can go into the stomach. Sure, your stomach is big. It can go in there, but now it has to actually go through here. So first of all, you can train your stomach. You can train it so that the walls are bigger, better space for fluid. You can also train it so that you can empty the contents of this quicker and better absorption, which means you'll have less bloating, less fullness, less osmotic shift, so less chance for diarrhea, less residual volume, so less stuff kind of hanging around in the gut, and less stomach discomfort. But having said that, you also have to keep in mind that as you get more dehydrated, as you get more glycogen depleted, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to digest and absorb nutrition. So when I tell athletes less is best, it doesn't mean that you don't need any calories or you don't need to be taking in sports nutrition, but you have to be very disciplined with your fueling. When Lucy Charles was racing in the Ironman World Championship, she was hurting really bad, but she knew that she couldn't just take in another gel. It's not going to give her more energy. Sure, she needed to take in nutrition to help her blood sugar so she doesn't crack, right? And she needs to kind of keep the brain communicating with her muscles. But she knows that at that point, she has strong muscles, she has a strong heart, she's fit, she can focus on her form, but more nutrition isn't going to help her go any faster. Now let's talk about dehydration and muscle fatigue. And as I'm talking about this, I want you to pay attention to how many times I talk about sodium, because athletes are so afraid of running out of sodium. But we can't forget, or I must remind you, that you don't lose sodium without fluids. So if you are so concerned about sodium, I ask you first to focus on your fluid intake on the bike and on the run. Because if you aren't drinking enough fluids on when you're running, then those salt pills, they're not going to do you any good. The gels aren't going to do you any good. You need fluids. And especially for inefficient athletes, heavy sweaters, your body's having to work so hard. You are creating a lot of internal heat. So you need that fluid. Yes, you also need sodium, but salt pills is not going to replenish the loss of water that's happening from your sweat. And then you have to train your gut. You have to train your gut to be able to drink fluids while you're running. Now, heat production during exercise is 20 times greater than at rest. Let's think about a 40-degree day outside, right, on the colder side, and you go for a run. Right? And let's go for a run with shorts and gloves, a hat, and a long sleeve shirt. Well, I bet after a mile, 10 minutes, depending on the athlete, you're going to start getting hot, right? So you can tell just right there in 40 degrees how much warmer you get just going for a run. Now imagine you've already been exercising for 5 or 8 hours and your muscles have been producing heat for that long. And it's hot outside. Then you go for a run. Well, you better believe that you are in a state of dehydration and you're just going to get further in dehydration. So when you think about the guidelines that are given to runners of you don't need anything if it's an hour or less, or it's okay to just take a gel every 30 minutes when you're running, and then you get to race day, you're going to grab water at every aid station. You're going to need sports nutrition. That's why I'm such a huge proponent of wearing a hydration belt and using sports nutrition in every single run, so that by the time you get to race day, your body is not only healthy and fit, we know how corrosive running can be, but you have trained yourself, you have prepared yourself, and you can meet your needs for that run. Now, blood flow to the skin is increased because we need to dissipate that heat. We do that through sweating, which you do lose sodium and water, and that allows you to cool yourself so you don't overheat. But as we're exercising, blood flow to the gut and liver is reduced. So we just need to keep that in mind, that the hotter your body gets, less and less blood flow goes to the gut. So if it's a really hot day like Kona, eating solid food, that's not a really good idea. Sure, you're getting the grams of carbs that you need, and it's okay to satisfy your tummy. If you're feeling a little bit hungry, you just need to change the texture or the taste in your mouth. But with very little blood flow going to your gut, you're going to cause GI issues and dehydration to yourself by taking in that solid food. So we have to think about the demands of the race and understanding how to use sports nutrition products based on the physiology of our body for these race conditions. Now, your working muscles need oxygen. Your heart beats faster to get more blood to your muscles. Your plasma, which is mostly water, carries nutrients and blood cells. Your plasma volume drops during dehydration, which then reduces the amount of oxygen and nutrients that can be transported to the cells. Well, as we just read, working muscles need oxygen. So if they're not getting that oxygen, guess what happens? Your body's going to start shutting down. So taking in another gel when your plasma volume has already dropped, it's not going to solve the issue, right? You're already behind. You can potentially try to get back by lowering your core temperature, walking, getting that core temperature back to a healthy place. But if you're already at a low plasma volume, you're already dehydrated, taking another gel, eating a bar, it's not going to help you come back from that state. So another reason for those GI issues is just really not understanding your physiology and what's happening. Your blood is going to become much thicker, and then the general circulation is going to be reduced. So when your muscles are deprived of oxygen, nutrients, and fluids, of course they're going to fatigue, they're going to strain, they're going to cramp. So it's not that you need a salt pill because your muscles are cramping. You have to ask yourself, have I been hydrating? Did I train myself to hydrate? Did I give myself a well-formulated beverage that's going to be digested and absorbed? And then fluid loss, it exacerbates the cardio strain, increases your core temperature, impairs performance, reduces blood flow, blood volume, blood pressure, sweat production, stroke rate. It increases the use of carbohydrates and lactate. This is going to cause your heart rate to drift up, even though you're doing the same effort, which will then reduce the ability to transport heat to your periphery, which will then further increase core temperature. So it's not the salt pills that's the answer. It's not the gels. It's making sure that you're staying well hydrated, and you're going to do that the best with something that has fluids in it. The last thing is fitness inefficiency and poor economy. And so let's think about athletes. You've got the endurance, right? You've got the engine. But if you have a poorly built frame, you can't make good use of that fitness. So what I mean by that is, to the athlete who is thinking, well, gosh, I did these 6-hour rides. I did 100-mile rides every weekend for 3 months. I did that 20-mile run. Now, just as a reference, as a coach, we do not have our athletes doing 100-mile rides every weekend. They maybe do one 100-mile ride. Most of our rides are about 4 hours. We rarely do over 3.5 hours if they're on the trainer. The athletes, we never have them run over 2.5 hours. Most of our athletes don't run more than 2 hours, but we do a lot of intensity. We do a lot of consistency and frequency, a lot of brick workouts, a lot of 2-a-days. So that's just telling you that there's different ways to get to a similar outcome, but you can have a really powerful engine, but you might not be strong. We create really strong athletes, and that's something that is very important for long distance triathlon. So you can have good stroke volume, aerobic capacity, your endurance training. It's going to increase your red blood cells, your mitochondria, your muscle fibers, your fat metabolism, number of capillaries. So yes, you can finish an Ironman, but you have to ask yourself, have I really changed my physiology so that I'm meeting the demands of this long, strength-based sport? So let's break down the sport, swimming. Well, swimming, if you're not swim fit, you're already putting yourself at a huge disadvantage. I've heard coaches and athletes say, well, the swim doesn't matter, or it's just a warm up for the rest of the race. We want our athletes to be swim fit. We have our athletes swimming 3 to 4 times a week. And consistently all year long. And most of the swim workouts are over 3,000 yards. It's very important to be swim fit. Swimming, you're pretty much hypoxic the whole time. So if anybody thinks that swimming doesn't impact the bike, you're so wrong, that you have so quick, short, spaced out breathing. This is going to increase your body's acidity, less oxygen. You're already starting the bike with less oxygen available to your muscles. That's why T1, you have the highest heart rate from the whole race. You also, evolutionary speaking, we weren't produced to be good escaping predators in the water. We did that on the land. So our bodies don't really know how to move well in the water. So we have a lot of drag in the water. We use our whole body when we swim. We use major muscle groups in our lower body when we run, but we have over 24 separate voluntary muscles, like the muscles in your neck to your feet, that help you swim. You also need really good lung strength to be able to oxygenate those muscles. And then you need open water experience as well. So if you have a risk for GI issues, you want to ask yourself, am I swim fit? Am I doing everything I can to keep myself as swim fit as possible and keep getting fitter? Look at Lucy Charles. She did the most swimming she's ever done, and she's already a great swimmer. And it's only helping her on her bike and her run. So now cycling. So everybody talks about the functional threshold power, the FTP, which is a balance of your aerobic and anaerobic energy system. I think that the FTP is a little misleading because you can get really good at pushing 20 minutes of power, but I can tell you that for most athletes, they can't hold that same thing for an hour, but yet it's supposed to represent what you can hold for an hour. But keeping along with the FTP focus, since athletes are most familiar with it, the more work you can do aerobically, the faster and further you can go without massive fatigue. Again, the long distance race, it's all about energy, conserving energy. So why would you want to be anaerobic for several hours of the race when you can be aerobic and go further with less fatigue? It's also a lot easier on your energy systems and your digestion. So the goal with your training is to increase the amount of time that you can spend at a given power. But what I see from a lot of athletes is they're doing these long rides, they're doing these bike workouts, but I'm not really seeing their aerobic capacity improving. I'm not seeing them raising their FTP. Yes, they're growing their aerobic base, but either they're not fueling properly or not recovering properly or not willing to be uncomfortable. But the VO2 max, the anaerobic work, these high intensity sessions are extremely important. And the stronger you get, the faster you can go. Now, of course, it's going to get to a limit, but the whole goal is to be able to push a certain amount of power and to be able to then hold it. And you might just be at the place right now where you're still progressing and it's going to take time. But this is also could be a good invite for you to start doing more shorter distance races and not doing the Ironman so you can work to improve that FTP. We also want to work on pedaling mechanics, big gear work, high cadence, single leg. I was doing a really hard workout the other day on the trainer. And after my legs were completely smashed at the end of the workout, I tried to do some single leg drills. No way. I had no ability to pedal with one leg, which just showed me how fatigued and how much that would impact my pedaling mechanics. So again, that's something we need to think about. And then also the bike fit, aerodynamics, terrain management, and your confidence riding outside. If you tend to get your most issues of nutrition, GI issues on the run, you need to become a better swimmer and a cyclist. Don't expect to just put all your focus into the run to be a better runner off the bike and to have less GI issues. The swim and the bike precede the run. If you can become stronger on the swim and the bike, you'll be able to run better. And then the last thing, running off the bike. Running off the bike is completely different than standalone running. Running a marathon, running a half marathon, it is not going to prepare you better for the Ironman or the half Ironman. What you do in a standalone run on a Sunday morning, you cannot compare those same paces as what you're going to do off the bike on race day. Your oxygen consumption, your respiratory frequency, the ventilation rate, your heart rate, they all increase running off the bike versus standalone running. So right away, we know that you are using more energy running off the bike as is. So take that into account, that if you're not swim and bike fit, that is going to add more stress to the stress you're already bringing to the run when you get off the bike. There's also metabolic changes. You're in a state of glycogen depletion, dehydration. Your respiratory muscles are fatigued. So you've been breathing a lot for many hours. Your stroke volume has decreased, increased core body temperature. So you're already starting the run with all of these metabolic changes. Again, going back to nutrition guidelines, they don't account for these metabolic changes that are happening. They don't account for the biomechanical changes, that you have muscle fiber damage, you have increased ground contact time, increased vertical oscillation, decreased running economy, where your foot lands, how far, the decreased stride length, the gait frequency. You have tight hip flexors from sitting. You have less stored elastic energy. I mean, if you have ever tried to run off the bike, you might feel good for the first few miles, but then it's like, wait, I feel good, but I just can't run any faster, right? You're not using that posterior chain. You can't use the tendons in the foot any harder. You're just so fatigued. So there are a lot of biomechanical changes. And again, this is why you can't just say, well, I'll just use the gels. I'll just use the aid stations on race day. This is why having that hydration belt and carrying your nutrition with you is so important, because metabolically and biomechanically, there are changes that are happening when you run off the bike. And if you're not prepared for that, you're going to be compromised on race day. And then there's neural fatigue, that your motor patterns are reduced. And I think this is what gets a lot of people, is just that you can't communicate that brain to the muscles anymore. Of course, walking feels better. Of course, it's harder to move yourself forward. Your central nervous system is so fatigued. You've been racing for 9, 10, 11, 12 hours. It's very hard to send signals and recruit the muscles. That's why also having nutrition on you is really helpful, because you might be in that state where your brain is just not communicating to your muscles, and getting that little bit of sugar into your mouth, it can go right to your brain and start signaling those muscle fibers. There's a point when you're running where you've done so much damage, you can't get any more nutrition to help the muscles contract. So what we're trying to do is communicate with those muscles. So the decrease in the activation of the muscles, it's all happening because of the brain. So that's another reason, again, why we just can't use the same guidelines for standalone running for running off the bike. It is a very demanding sport, running off the bike, and very different. So now to finish, you have to just keep training to change your physiology. So if you're like, well, Marnie, what do I do? Well, you have to first ask yourself, is there something that you can do now that can help you? Is it a problem of how you're fueling? Is it a pacing? Is it an economy? What is that primary thing that might be limiting you? And if you can't really think of anything, then you might just be where you are in your journey, that you're making those changes. I can't give the same training plan to an experienced Ironman athlete as a first-time Ironman athlete. That athlete is still building their base and working on their aerobic development. So it takes time. My advice is, don't jump just into Ironman racing, because it takes time to really have the physiology where you can have a race where, yes, it's going to hurt, but you feel like you're able to put together a race that you're proud of. And I think a lot of athletes, they go into the Ironman with great endurance, but they just don't have that strength and that economy to be able to put together a race where you don't have those very deep, dark moments that you have to end up walking for several miles. And then you also experience those GI issues just because your physiology just isn't there yet. So it does take time. So how can you get there? This is what a lot of athletes think of with workouts. They have their workout. Let's turn that box green. Well, there's some problems with that, because are you really changing your physiology if you're waking up at 3 a.m. and sitting on the trainer for 6 hours? Are you really changing your physiology if you jump out of bed and go do a run workout? Are you really changing your physiology if you're doing a long run with your friends. So we have to ask ourselves and be honest with ourselves. I have the workout and I'm completing the workout, but am I actually changing my physiology that's going to allow me to be stronger, more resilient for race day? Well, here's how we can do that. The first is understand the workout purpose. Is this an easy workout? Is the purpose to control your heart rate? Sure, it feels good to run hard, but are you actually teaching yourself how to run more economical, how to reduce your core body temperature so you don't heat up as quickly? What is the purpose? Is it a very intense workout where it's very demanding and you better be on your A game? Is it a skill session? What is the purpose of that workout? And then you can go into that workout better prepared. You always want to make sure you get restful sleep. You want to make sure you eat the right pre-workout snack and hydration to set you up for a good workout. And then, of course, good mobility, because we're carrying around so much fatigue as triathletes that we have to make sure that we're priming our system, getting our brain communicating with our muscles so that we can set ourselves up for a good workout. We reduce the risk for injury, that we can maximize our time spent training. So these three things are very important. Then once we did that, then we need to make sure we have good nutrition during the workout. So depending on if it's an hour workout, a 2.5 workout, a long workout outside, we need to make sure that we have the appropriate nutrition to support that training session. And for Tri-Marnie athletes, I give you guys a lot of sports nutrition guidelines to help you with that. But we want to make sure that we always have sports nutrition for swimming, for biking, and when we're running outside, we always make sure that we have our hydration belt and we're always running with hydration. Again, when we think about, oh, fasted workouts, or I'll just take a gel, or, oh, I don't need this nutrition, remember, those guidelines are not for long distance triathletes. We don't have those guidelines, but hopefully with the information I gave you, you can better understand why we have different guidelines, why we may need nutrition when we run for 20 minutes, why we might need to do liquid calories instead of solid food. Then during our workout, we want a present mindset. We want to listen to our body. We don't want to chase paces. As I said earlier, running off the bike is a completely different sport than standalone running. So we can't be chasing paces or, the workouts pass or fail depending on how fast or slow you ran. We want to limit distractions so you can get a good quality training session in. And then we want to make sure, just because the workout's complete, now we need to actually recover. Good hydration, good nutrition after the workout, and then good recovery is everything that happens between two workouts. So we have to have good nutrition throughout the rest of the day so we can set ourselves up for a good next workout, whether it's later that day or the next morning. So we want to make sure we're eating good nutrients, carbohydrates, protein, healthy fats. We want to make sure we time our nutrition appropriately. So these are all the things that you can be doing. It's not just about checking off those long workouts. It's not just about, doing hard workouts. It's about maximizing the training that you have that is specifically designed for you as an athlete, and being consistent, and then also thinking about the demands of the workout and fueling and hydrating properly. So here's some sources that I used. All right. Well, I hope you guys found this helpful. If you have any questions, you can just let me know. Thanks.